On the podcast today, we had Jason, and it was a really interesting episode, very unique from a lot of the other episodes we have. This one delved deep into the idea of spirituality in the sense of connecting with oneself. And Jason spoke about his story and all the different therapies he tried and how those therapies just became in itself perpetuating a cycle and a story in his mind of staying stuck in the problem and having problems and needing to fix all these problems that were him in therapy. And we spoke about how he came back to himself and had a bit of a spiritual awakening. So go ahead and listen to the episode. We get into loads of other amazing stuff too. So I'll see you in there. Welcome, Jason, to the Inside Addiction podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Luke. I look forward to seeing where the conversation goes.
Yeah, awesome. So to get started, I wonder if you could tell us about your first kind of memory when you were 5.
Yeah, yeah, that's a deep starting point. Yeah, I don't know. I really spent many years wondering, was that my first memory? But I'm pretty sure, perhaps because of the impact of that memory of the police being at the door and my dad having been killed in an accident. It was certainly a memory that's etched in my mind very clearly. You know, it's like, and it's stayed with me. It's still, even 47 years later, you know, it's like it's still a painful thing to think about. You know.
Yeah, that is a painful moment in your life that you remember.
Yeah, for sure. It shaped my life, you know, in more ways than I can ever imagine. In good ways as well, you know. It's not all about the negativity and grief, but it's really, there's a lot of gratitude as well for things that came out of that experience, you know.
Yeah, and how did that experience ripple throughout your life?
I think in the 70s, that's when it was, you know. It's like there was no Google and no simple way of finding help. You couldn't just jump on watch a YouTube video or anything, you know. So I think my mum probably picked up the yellow pages and sent me to the psychiatric centre. That was after a few years of me trying to cope with grief in my own way, which was food, was what I picked up, you know, as a coping mechanism. And food, and then destructive behaviour, and then stealing and stuff, you know. And it's like, and that's when my mum sent me into the psychiatrist, and I ended up being medicated for depression at 10 years old. And from there, I had perhaps a 30-plus year journey in the mental health and psychiatric system, you know, with various psychiatric interventions and diagnoses and things like that along the way. But it certainly, you know, it was the start of a downfall of a lot of chaos, you know, and a lot of really what I call intelligence, strangely enough, these days. You know, it's kind of like all that. What I don't like is pathologizing of what I call normal human response to adversity, you know. And any child that went through such a tragic and difficult experience, but then found a way to cope. You know, that's what food was, my coping mechanism. Chaos was my coping mechanism, as it was a way of not being inside me, you know, because it was so painful to be me, that I found. And that's what children do. They find a way to cope with difficult experiences. So rather than calling it eating disorders and trauma and all the things that we look at in the psychological world, I just see it as intelligence. You know, it's like it's like that no matter what's happening, we have the resilience to cope with it, even though it doesn't look so socially acceptable, you know?
Yeah. And for you, how was it to be diagnosed and to go through the medication, all those different, like you said, that system at a young age and on that 30-year journey?
Yeah. I just became naturally more rebellious and more destructive, you know. It's like, because none of it really addressed what was needed. You know, I really wanted to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be held, to have somebody to show me the way and tell me it would be okay. But that never came, you know. It's like you can't get those things from medication and a system, you know. It's like, so all that happened was, you know, I just pushed harder and went further into my own chaos, you know, into that. My addiction started at 13 to heroin. And, you know, I had many years of crime and chaos and shit, you know, like for all those years of escaping myself to the point of oblivion and destruction, you know, as much as possible. It was like I really didn't care about anything or anyone apart from getting away from myself, you know, and I certainly found a way to do that. And then like going to rehab, you know, drugs were never the problem, as I said. They were only ever the coping mechanism for what was going on internally. And taking the drugs away, going to rehab, you know, I'm left with no coping mechanism. You know, it's like you took away my coping mechanism and you haven't yet replaced it with anything. So it's like, well, the first thing I do in my own infinite intelligence and creativity is I go back to food, because I know food gives me a sense of comfort, you know, and it's reliable and it's consistent and it works, you know, when I do it. So I stole food, I ate out of bins, I ballooned in weight again, and so on. So, you know, the traditional approach to addiction, I really often call it like a whack-a-mole approach, because you kind of take away drugs and alcohol and food comes back. You take away food and sex comes back. You take away sex and you pick up gambling. You put down gambling and you pick up relationships. You know, it's like one thing after another, because none of it really replaces or deals with the core internal dis-ease, you know, that's going on, that the drugs and alcohol were really just a symptom of, you know?
Yeah. And when you think about going to rehab, how old were you then?
I was 23 when I went to rehab.
Yeah. And did you look at any other treatment options or any different ideas, or was rehab your main focus? How was it for you?
I didn't really, I mean, I was in a homeless shelter at the time, and my brother came, my mum, I think, something, and they just said, "Oh, what about rehab?" And I was just like, "Yeah, okay," because I just thought I had a physical addiction to heroin, and somehow, quite deluded I was, I guess, considering the journey I'd been on already, was that if I could somehow stop taking heroin, that I would have a normal life, or that everything would be okay, you know? So I agreed to go to rehab on the basis that I thought I would be physically detoxed. And after that, everything would be okay, you know? It'd be a short spell of having a PlayStation and being drip-fed Valium and, you know, everything being okay. Little did I know it was like a therapeutic 12-step approach to addiction, which was quite intense, you know, and stuff like that. But I would have done anything really at that time, because I was pretty desperate, you know.
Yeah. And would you agree with me in the sense of one thing that you said was physically detoxed and then you'll be okay? I feel like a lot of clients and a lot of people in addiction think, okay, I'm going to go to rehab, I'm going to get physically detoxed, my body won't be dependent on alcohol or heroin, and I'll be fine, right? That's the way it works. But like you said, so much stuff goes on underneath, but you feel like that's kind of a bit of a myth.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, like, you pick up drugs and alcohol not by accident, you know. You don't accidentally become addicted to some substance, you know. It's like it's a coping mechanism for an internal disease. So if you're taking away, I mean, all you're doing by detoxing somebody physically is taking away their coping mechanism, you know. And it's like, if they haven't started to understand themselves or become spiritually aware or really sort of done some psychological work on their internal dis-ease and found a way of being with themselves, then inevitably at some point they'll return to some form of addiction as a coping mechanism, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And what did you do after rehab? Where did life take you?
Um, all over, really. I mean, like, I didn't become, I was already very smart, and I was very smart intellectually, you know, so like I learned life without drugs, you know, like through that lens, you know, that intellectual lens. So I managed to make money, create businesses and do things like that. But internally, my world got worse, you know. That's why I became a psychotherapist at some point in my recovery, because I felt like the 12 steps were not really addressing what the struggles that I was having, you know. And it's like a lot of my struggles were in secret, you know, with food, with relationships and so on, and sitting in meetings, smiling, saying everything was wonderful just because I wasn't taking drugs really wasn't doing anything for me, you know. Like, the truth was that I probably wanted to commit suicide a lot of the time, because I felt so much discomfort in my internal life, you know. So that's why I started going to therapy, and that's why I became a psychotherapist, because I thought if I could really understand this stuff, if I could really help others, then surely I can help myself And what is it I wanted? I just wanted to find peace of mind and happiness. That's all I wanted at that time. But I just had no clue what that was or what it looked like or how I got it.
Yeah. And what would you say are some of the downsides of the 12 steps or meetings?
Well, I say this with no malice or detrimental, because the 12 steps saved my life. But like, the 12 steps is just another lie. It's a better lie than the one I was telling myself before, that I'm an addict and I can never recover. It's kind of like, and it's a lie that saves people's lives, but it's not true that we're broken or that we have any disease or there's anything wrong with us. Addiction is an intelligence of the system. It is not a a part of us that's broken or that needs fixing. And when we install a new belief system, we are also bounded by the limitations of that belief system. I'm an addict. I'll always be an addict. I need to do these things in order to be okay. I have to go to meetings. I have to do service. I have to do these things just in order to be okay, when I'm already okay. It's kind of like, I've always been okay. It's kind of like, so there's benefits, there's absolute benefits, particularly the social and fellowship benefits of 12 steps and so on, beautiful relationships, doing things together, being around other people that have struggled with the same things are all massively beneficial. And there's nothing wrong with the 12 steps, so to speak, but there is a point where it becomes a limitation in your spiritual growth and your understanding of yourself. And that's what happened for me. That's why I stopped going after 22 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And you went for, like you say, 22 years. That's a long time. And
Yeah.
and you stopped going, and that's because you felt like you hit some kind of glass ceiling that you can get any further through the 12 steps.
Yeah. I guess I saw that I had everything inside of me and there was nothing wrong with me, and I no longer felt like I needed to say I'm an addict just to be okay, because I saw that it wasn't true. I saw that belief that I took on had served me well for the time that I'd been in that process, but it was no longer valuable for me to say that, because it was actually more limiting than it was beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And is there any other tools that you used along the way? Of course, 12 steps. What other tools, and rehab, you went to rehab. What other tools did you use along the way?
Yeah, as I'd started training as a psychotherapist, I was much involved in the therapy world and trauma work and cathartic stuff. I'd pretty much done everything I could find. I did Tony Robbins, I did the Hoffman process, I did all these cathartic release stuff and lots of therapy, as well as training to be a therapist in multiple different modalities, in person-centered counseling, in TA, in NLP, and other stuff along the way as well. And it come to a point, I guess, when I was 20 plus years clean, that I thought I'd resigned. Really, I'd kind of thought, if anything, I'd become better at coping with misery than I'd become less miserable. It's like I didn't get any happier, I didn't get any more contentment, but I'd just become almost resigned or hopeless in my misery. And it's like, that's really where I started looking in a completely different direction, maybe even serendipitously, the way that I came across a more spiritual understanding that really freed me for the first time in all my searching. So, yeah, I'd done as much as I could find. I tried everything that everyone suggested. If there was a new therapy, EMDR, rapid transformational therapy, EFT, all these things that came out over the years that I was doing training, I would try anything, energetic work, anything I could try to help myself find some form of respite.
Yeah. Were there any particular ones that stand out to you as really beneficial?
No, and there's an interesting distinction I want to make about that. It's that I think all of them are valuable, but depending on where you're coming from and what you understand about yourself, like, and the place that I was in at the time that I was doing them, I don't think there's any value from that point, because it's like, it's really perpetuating the story of brokenness within. It's actually confirming. Like, I go to a therapist and I tell them about my childhood trauma and they go, oh yeah, that's going to take a long time to overcome that. It's really difficult, and it's kind of like, so it confirms to me that there's something wrong with me that needs fixing and that it's going to take a long time for me to be okay. but I see it completely differently now. It's like and maybe we get into that, how it looks different. It's like doing all those things from a place of wisdom versus this seems like a good idea, not to fix what's broken in me, but just because it feels good to do it.
Yeah. And was there any particular realization when you decided this kind of, as you said, whack-a-mole approach of trying all these different things wasn't working? Was there any kind of moment or time that really stands out?
Um, Only when I woke up, really, I guess, to see the futility of everything. It's like I like to see that I'd been trying to fix something that wasn't broken. That was the futility of it. It's like I'd been somewhat the system, that I'd been in since I was 10 years old, in many ways perpetuates, it creates and perpetuates the idea of brokenness. It provides a pathology to normal human response to adversity. It gives it that behavior, the normal human response to trauma, the coping mechanisms and so on. It pathologizes that, it gives it a label, and then it provides a solution to it, right? So it actually creates the problem and then it provides the solution to it. But the solution within that system is completely futile. It never actually resolves anything. So like I kind of saw when I went on this spiritual 3-day event in LA, and it was like I'd seen that every day I'd been waking up and creating myself within my own mind and creating the story of suffering based on all the information that I'd been given over the years. I've got childhood trauma, I'm an addict, I'm all these other things, it's kind of like, and how am I ever going to get better? Life is just completely hopeless. But this is the story I'd been thinking up every day in my own mind. And it's like, and then I'm feeling the heaviness of my own thinking about myself, it's like, and the heaviness is so intense that I want to escape it. So I'm indulging in all these behaviors to escape the heaviness that I'm feeling, that I'm creating with my own mind on a daily basis. And I really woke up to that shit. Like, like I am just a thought in my own mind. I am just a character playing in my own movie. There's no, like, the past is not damaging me right now, this moment today when I had the realization. And it was like a real sense of liberation, because it was like in that moment, I just felt completely free, and I just felt this beautiful, freeing kind of blissful moment that lasted for a few months. It's kind of like of just really being completely free and nothing having had changed on the outside of me, and I knew I became very in touch with a deep wisdom within myself, because I kind of knew I didn't want to go back to therapy right there and then, and I'd been with this same therapist for years and years, and I put an end to that relationship straight away. And that's when I stopped going to meetings when I was 22 years clean. I no longer feared dying, because you always hear people say, oh, people who stop going to meetings, they die, they relapse and die. I was just like, that's bullshit. I'm done. I'm not going back. I don't need it. And I knew all these things very deeply. So that pivotal moment, that happened really sort of took me on this journey inwardly to where I started to trust my own sense of well-being versus really trying to look for other people to make me better.
Yeah. So you're almost before searching for all these different therapies, all these different things to fix you, but that was also reinforcing the idea that you were broken in the first place.
Yeah.
And when you went to this spiritual sort of place that you went to, you then had that awakening. It was like, wait a minute, I don't need to get caught up in all these stories and all these thoughts. I just am okay. I'm okay as I am.
Yeah, exactly that. It was very profound though, it's kind of like, maybe to the listener, it just sounds like, oh yeah, okay. But like, it was such a profound experience, there was a felt sense of calmness, a felt sense of being just okay. And I'd never had that. I'd like, since I was a kid, I'd never felt okay. So it was like, that was, perhaps I was 42 then, the thing with my dad happened when I was 5. So I'd probably spent 37 years trying to escape myself and never feeling okay, So when you first get that sense of I'm okay, it's quite a profound and powerful experience.
100%, 100%. And this event that you went to, what was it? What happened? Take us through it.
It was a coaching thing in Los Angeles, and it was called an intensive, but it was very not intense. It was very relaxed, And I often talk about the key to hearing something beyond beyond our own thinking. It's like, and there really was an invitation for me there to just relax and just be there. And I thought, God, I've done a lot of psychotherapy trainings, a lot of cathartic experiences, but no one's ever said to me, can you just be here? Can
Yeah.
you just be here? Not your thinking, not your planning, not your notebook, not your money's worth, but like, can you just be here with us? It's kind of like, I'd never had that invitation to be present, and I really saw that loving invitation allowed me to just relax into the moment and allowed me to hear something new about what was going on. And that was really, somebody was sharing a spiritual understanding about the creation of our own mind and a deeper truth about the intelligence behind life, and how our consciousness works. It's like that I'd really saw something beyond my own creation, beyond me, which was the only thing that had existed prior to that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. So you kind of chunked up into the awareness. Do you name that as like the universe, God, anything like that? Do you have a name for it yourself?
Whatever you want to call it is good with me. You could call it the
Yeah.
universe or God's will or higher power or whatever, infinite intelligence, whatever you want to call it. Whatever you prefer.
Yeah. And you reach that state of just being in the moment, complete presence in that moment. And was that spiritual, sort of experience you had, was that based on any kind of philosophy or modality or religion or anything like that? Or was it just simply that experience that was enough?
Yeah, I mean, like the place where I went, the Michael Neal was the guy, and he was sharing Sydney Banks's understanding of the three principles, which is mind, consciousness, and thought, which is like a spiritual concept, really pointing to a greater truth. So it was through that conceptual understanding that I really just saw, what it was actually pointing to. I call it one of many fingers pointing to the same moon.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah,
And
it was. Yeah.
yeah, and a really profound experience. And how has that impacted your life and what you do in the here and now?
Um, Well, I mean, like I said, that when it first happened, I really knew that I didn't want to go to my therapist anymore. It was kind of like I also knew that I'd spent 10 years training as a therapist, but I couldn't do it. I could no longer do that because I saw that people were not broken and they did not need fixing, you know. And I just saw that in some ways my work as a therapist was just a reflection of my understanding of myself, and that has to be the case for every therapist too. There can't be anything other than that. The only thing we can ever project is our own beliefs and our own ideas, you know. So I had really seen that actually I was contributing to people's misery, in a way, innocently. Nobody's being malicious here, I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. It's like, it's just the limitations of the misunderstanding, of how the human experience works. But so I couldn't practice in the same way as a therapist myself because I thought I can't do that to people. I know people don't need that. They need to see what's right with them and not what's wrong with them. And and I started looking. I spent a long time really looking at like how does this translate into normal, non-abstract, non-philosophical kind of conversation in a way that I could point people to really see what was good about them and what was right about them, and like so I started doing that in my work. I started having sessions with people and I stopped calling it, in fact, I have a love-hate relationship with the term therapist and coach and all teacher and whatever you want to call it, because it's like, I don't really know, but I sometimes describe it like being a tour guide. It's kind of like I'm just pointing at things and sometimes people look there and they see it, it's a bit like that. Um, but I started pointing people to what was right, what was good about them, helping them see, like what was intelligence at work and how, like their years of suffering had been in service of something. It's like of pointing them home, of bringing them to a place of really getting in connection with themselves, and seeing that the most, the heaviest thing that anyone ever carried was the weight of their own thinking, and also the most difficult thing that anyone would ever face would be meeting themselves as they are, and in my work like that with people, I started to see how quickly people had realizations and how it was very different to digging into what was wrong with them, you know, which was a very long-term sort of therapeutic, slow, trusting build-up of a relationship. You know, it's kind of like the other seemed to have much more of an impact much more quickly. You know, people had profound insights and changes within their life quite quickly. And what happened with my work with addiction was that I stopped talking about the actual process or substance that people were indulging in. You know, in fact, I never talked about that. You know, like what I saw was that in traditional approaches, we look at all the things that people are doing, could be gambling, sex, money, food, drugs, alcohol, and try and patch up or find a way to stop that so you can get to feel better. But what I saw was it actually works the opposite way to that. Like that when you feel better, you stop doing that. You know, so you didn't really need to talk about the process or substance or anything. You just help people see that they were okay and get reconnected to themselves and have a different experience of themselves and a different relationship with their experience. And I noticed that after a while, people used to say to me, "Oh yeah, that drinking a bottle of wine every night, I just don't do that anymore. It just doesn't seem to make sense. I wake up most days feeling quite content, you know, and it's easy for me to say no to it now." So I started to see that this stuff works in the opposite way, not in the traditional way that I'd been taught as a therapist, you know, to help people. And it just didn't make sense to me any longer to help people stop drinking, like as the solution to, you know, stopping an addiction or something, for example, you know?
Yeah. So rather than saying stop drinking or using drugs, stop doing this thing, stop focusing your attention there, let's fix your trauma, all of that stuff. It was like, let's in some ways raise your level of consciousness so high and your sense of self and your just general self so high that you don't actually want to engage in that behavior anymore, just becomes kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. It's helping people see that they are genuinely okay. It's not like I need to convince myself that I'm okay or somebody needs to convince themselves that they're okay. It's like seeing that as the human experience consists of, we create ourselves in our own mind via our own thinking. That's all we can ever do. It's the only way we can experience reality is through our own perspective and our own perception. That's all we can experience. There is an objective world outside of us, like, but we're only in relationship to that via perception. You know, it's like nobody can make me feel anything. No person, no thing, no object can make me feel happy, sad, angry, disappointed. You know, it's like my perception of what happens outside of me can make me feel happy, sad, or disappointed. You know, it's like, so seeing it from that perspective is very empowering because it's really seeing that it's my own filters and it's my own conditioning and it's the result of my own childhood experiences that I see things have to be a certain way or I want things to be a certain way in order to make me happy. And the realization is that I can let go of those beliefs and ideas and needs for the outside world to be any way and allow myself to be free regardless of what's happening outside of myself, you know, is super powerful because you can then be okay regardless of what's happening when you see that your source of okayness is within you. It's not outside of you.
Yeah. Yeah. The source of okayness is inside of you, not outside of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like your ability to respond to adversity and not your ability to cope with adversity, you know, like your ability to respond to it, knowing that it's coming, you know, like it's within me, the power to know what to do when there's something to do, you know, it's not like whether things happen or don't happen, but the security that I always ever craved for in things, in money, in houses, in relationships, you know, it's like, it couldn't ever come from those things because everything's changing, you know, everything's constantly changing. It's like I can't find security in an objective world because nothing is constant. The only thing that's constant is my response.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you say, that kind of calmness or that peace or that fulfillment or whatever that energy is kind of inside.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and that's what I explore with people now. It's like, how do we explore that which we are, you know, that which we truly are, not that which we create about ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves, the character that we play in the movie in our own mind, but that which we really are, the constant within us, the ability to respond, the resilience, the infinite creativity that we've been showing up with our whole life, you know, coping with adversity and so on and stuff like that. Seeing all that, seeing what's right with us gives people a newfound sense of security about life because they no longer need the outside to be a certain way to be okay. You know, they just know that they can respond to the moment when there's something to respond to, and that is permanent and it's reliable.
Yeah, yeah, and consistent. It's always there. Yeah. And how do you manage the balance between sometimes the spiritual and that side of things and the kind of woo woo that can become a bit too much for some people? And some people are like, give me the practical tools, Jason, to tell me what's going on. How do you manage the balance for people to kind of find that sort of middle ground so that they can actually absorb the information and don't just get lost?
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm very guided by the moment, it's like I have to be, because that's what I'm really pointing people to. And I can't really show up with a list of linear progress for somebody and telling them that it's like it's all within them, because it wouldn't work. It's kind of like, so I have to be guided by the moment. And different people require different metaphoric ways of exploring the truth. Metaphors are a great way of sharing, rather than abstract language. Some people love philosophical and abstract language. It's like they can really resonate with it and they can really get a little bit quiet in their mind. But many people, like all of us, um, have an intellectual approach to life, especially if we've been through some trauma, some struggles. It's like we want to know, the first question they want to ask, well, how do I do that? What do I do? How long do I do it for? How does it work? It's kind of like, because it really looks to the intellectual mind that if you can give me steps A, B, and C, then I can get result D. It's like, well, really, it's helping people see that there's no clarity from the mind. It's kind of like the mind just wants to work things out. It can't find clarity because there are no answers. It's like, it's not an intellectual thing that we're looking for. It's peace of mind and contentment, which is in no way intellectual. It's a state of being. So it's good when people come with those questions, because it's really to help them see that they're just trying to work it out, which is normal for life, but it's perhaps the worst tool in the toolbox for finding well-being.
Yeah, because that reminds me of the Jason who you were, who was like trying to do all these therapies. Or if I do EMDR, if I go and do this therapy, if I do
Yeah.
this one, tick all these boxes, then my brain can say, done all these therapies, that'll make sense. I must be fixed now, right? Because I did every step in the 12 steps, did all this stuff. Now I'm
Yeah.
done. But that never comes, right? You're always constantly searching, seeking, trying to fix, like you said, someone or a being that isn't even broken in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's innocent too. It's a normal way. Many of us have become very good at using our intellectual mind to cope, with life. It's kind of like it creates a sense of certainty, and it's like, if I can work things out, if I know if I do this, this, and this, I get that. It's like, it's just a way of creating a false sense of certainty. So it's really it's challenging for people to let go of that sometimes, because you're really pulling the rug, the ground from underneath them. It's like that they're used to creating their whole security and identity on. It's like, but actually, what you're replacing it with is something so much more consistent and solid.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, as you say that, and I've been talking to people today and had another podcast earlier, and what's sitting with me is a sense of addiction can be very consistent in some ways, right? If I drink and if I use drugs, like in my own experience, it was always there for me, always gave me some kind of result. It was consistent. Yes, it was bad for me, but it was always there. I could always get that hit of a joint, that line of a Coke, whatever it may be, line of Coke. And in the same way, when you reach that level of spiritual calmness and oneness, like you say, that's a different level of consistency. To me, in my own experience, they're like two sides of the same coin. You have the addiction over here, which is consistently negative in some ways or bad for you. Then you have this, spiritual kind of peace and calmness that's consistently always there below your thoughts. When you quiet your mind, when you reach that place of just calmness, it just is. There's nothing, there's no labels, there's no anything else there to worry about.
Yeah. Yeah, words fall a little short to describe that state of being. It's kind of like, any words you try and use don't really do a good job of explaining what it is. But yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a false sense of safety and consistency in repetitive behavior, but actually it's not true, right? It's kind of like, you could overdose. There could be no drugs. Drugs could be cut with something that might not work. Anything could happen. If I just think, if I take these drugs every day, I'll be okay. It might happen for a while, but you can't control change. The only certainty in life is change, and things are going to change. And I guess that's why I say what we're talking about with the deeper connection to yourself is, it's consistent. It's always there. Nothing can affect that. It's always there.
Yeah, yeah. And I know it goes against what we're talking about, but I just have to ask, like, what are the steps? Like, if someone's listening to this, what are the next steps, the things someone can actually do to start to connect with themselves? I know that's going back into the brain, but have you got
Yeah.
any advice on that?
Yeah. It's a fair question, and everybody really wants to know that. It's kind of like, like the way I like the saying that you can never get enough of what you don't want. It's kind of like, so it's really about like looking at life from a different perspective. It's like, why am I suffering? It's kind of like, what does life want for me? And the reason I bring up that saying you can never get enough of what you don't want is because life will keep giving you shit until you become willing to look inwardly. Like you talk about in the 12 steps, maybe you've heard the term beaten into a state of reasonableness. Life will beat you into a state of reasonableness. You will keep picking dysfunctional relationships until they hurt enough, until you're willing to look inside. You'll keep doing things or pleasing people until you get hurt enough, until you look inwardly about what it is about yourself that these things are trying to point you to. And people used to say, all the answers are within, and that was so abstract to me. I had no clue what it meant. Whereabouts within? Where do I look? It's kind of like, but like, all these things are calling for introspection, for self-reflection. It's kind of like, who am I is the question. Like, what is going on within me, and how am I living out my own programming and my own conditioning in life? It's kind of like, and what is beyond that programming and that conditioning? Who am I? Is the question in spiritual terms. It's like, so becoming willing, it's kind of like, what happens when I'm on my own? What happens when I'm sat quietly? It's kind of like, can I bear my own thoughts? Do I have to distract myself with food or drugs or alcohol or pornography? It's like, all of this is everything that happens that's painful. I mean, to me, it looks like, and I don't know if you see it any different, but to me, it looks like there's only one purpose in life, and that is the journey to yourself. Everything that's happening is pointing you inwardly to yourself. It's kind of like, because that is the experience of true happiness and bliss, is being connected to yourself and being connected to your authentic self and having that different relationship with your experience. It's not that life stops happening and things stop pissing you off, but it's like you're so connected to yourself that you realize that you're just riding the roller coaster of life more gracefully.
Yeah. And one thing I think is I can sometimes get to that level of calmness, that level of peace, that level of presence with myself. But then I feel like step out the front door, so to speak, and life's constantly throwing you off, trying to push you off balance. Like something's happening, you're being triggered, life's kind of throwing shit at you, kind of testing you to stay in balance. I mean, how do you manage that in your own life? How do you manage coming back to that center or consistently being aligned?
Yeah, I think perhaps, like, I want to clear up about that to me, there's a common misconception in spiritual pursuits is that somehow if you get it, that you find bliss, and that's not what I'm talking about. It's like, what I'm talking about is having a different relationship with my own humanity. It's like, I give less of a shit about who I am. It's kind of like, I don't take myself so seriously. I'm still very human. I have reactions and responses to things. They're certainly not like they used to be, and I'm not so affected by it, but I can quite laugh at myself sometimes. It's not that I become permanently blissful and I sit cross-legged in the lotus position chanting Om all the time, and everything being wonderful. It's that, like, I just don't take myself so seriously. I still have a human experience because I don't see that there's any way to transcend the human experience. But when I see that I am the observer of my experience, I'm not the observed. I'm not what's happening. I'm not Jason, the character playing in the movie in my own mind. I am the observer of that. It's happening and it's going up and down, and I'm doing this, having moments of craziness, moments of bliss, moments of beauty all the time. It's just happening, just constantly changing. I'm not no longer trying to fix that or think that there's something wrong with it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And for me, what comes up is I live by the sea, and the sea goes in and out as tidal, right? And for me, the sea sometimes it's in, sometimes it's out, sometimes it's half in, sometimes there's waves, sometimes it's not, sometimes the sun's out, sometimes it's not. But every day when I go for a walk with my partner, I look at it the same way every single time. I'm not judging it. I'm not saying that's shit, that's good, that's bad. I'm just observing where it's at in that present moment. Doesn't matter where it is, it's all okay, whether the tide is in or not. And I'm just observing it.
Yeah, I like the saying, you're like a wave looking for its home that's forgot it's part of the ocean. You know, it's kind of like, that really speaks to me, what I'm talking about this experience. You know, it's like, that's it. I am of the creation, the same intelligence that makes the rain fall or the grass grow. You know, it's kind of like, how could I be any different than that? You know, it's like, it's part of mankind's infinite creation, the creation of pathologies and labels and psychological brokenness. You know, it's kind of like, but it doesn't hit the mark. You know, and there's so many people that talk about that stuff. You know, like I've studied a lot of the great psychiatrists and people who created the DSM and all that stuff and things, you know, and it's like, none of them believe in it anymore. They all say it's completely like, just a fabrication was the word I was looking for. You know, it's like, so even if other people are saying it, you know, it helps me in my quest of work of helping people see what's right with them, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of how people can find out more about you, if they want to work with you, where can people go? How can they find out more about you and work with you?
Best place is my website, wideworldcoaching.com. I have podcasts called Misunderstandings in the Mind, which has a lot of the spiritual conversations that I was talking about earlier when I originally did, and more recently on trauma and spirituality. You know, how do we combine the two, you know, without going into this rabbit hole of brokenness with trauma, but seeing that all of it is an intelligence of the system of the mind and body playing out, you know. So there's some really good conversations on that.
Yeah, no, awesome, awesome. And to everyone listening, we're going to link everything down in the description so you can find out more about Jason, listen to his podcast, work with him, all that kind of stuff. And as we come towards the end, anything, Jason, you wanted to leave the audience with, or for them to go away with?
One thing I always like to, I mean, like, it's the same with clients, you know, it's like I encourage people to follow their own wisdom, you know, it's like if they feel inclined to hear more, then follow that, you know, and if it doesn't really resonate, follow that too, you know. It's kind of like, I'm not trying to sell anything here. One of the important things I perhaps didn't say was I usually ask people not to listen to me in a strange, paradoxical way, you know. It's kind of like, don't listen to me, but listen to yourself when you're reflecting on what I'm saying, you know. It's kind of like, listen to your own wisdom. And that's perhaps what I would have said if I had a chance to say again at the start, you know. It's kind of like, listen to your own sense of knowing, listen to your own sense of wisdom and connection, because that is the very thing that's going to guide you home, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And if they're guided towards you, then follow that inquiry. And if
Yeah.
they're not, they'll probably stop listening anyway. So who cares?
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah. No, awesome, awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today, Jason. And thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.